Some of you may remember this.
That's worrying.
That was when the GTX 480, which I tested almost a year ago, totally legitimately and 100% not faked in any way whatsoever, burst into flames on camera. Luckily, that's not what I'm testing today. Today, I'm testing this. The 480's lower end, less power hungry and less fire-catchingly hot sibling, the GTX 460, specifically Gainward's GTX 460 Golden Sample Edition with 1GB of GDDR5 memory. Stay with us until after the intro, find out a bit more about this card before we get onto some of the benchmarks and some modern games. Packing almost 2 billion transistors, built on TSMC's 40nm fabrication process. The Fermi architecture-based GF104-325-A1 GPU core found in the GTX 460 GS run at 700 MHz, around 4% higher than the reference GTX 460 at 675 MHz. With a shader clock locked to double that of the core clock, 1400 MHz in the case of the 460 Golden Sample version. Originally, the GTX 460 came in 3 different memory configurations, with 768 MB, 1GB and 2GB variants being available, all being GDDR5 based. The 768 MB variant has more differences than just the memory size, but that's unrelated to today's video. Specifically, I have the 1GB variant here for testing, with the GDDR5 running on a 256-bit wide bus at 900 MHz, or 3600 MHz effectively, due to how this type of memory works. There is technically support for DirectX 12, but only up to a feature level of 11, which means that only a very limited number of DirectX 12 games may actually run, if at all. Before we get on with the benchmarks though, let's take a quick look at the test system that I'll be using throughout today's video, which features an AMD Ryzen 7 2700 overclocked to 4 GHz on a MSI B450 Gaming Plus Max motherboard, with 16GB of 3000 MHz DDR4 using CL16-18-18-39 1T timings. The OS is Windows 10 Pro 64-bit, running from a 128GB M.2 SSD, with all of the games and benchmarks running from mechanical hard drives. As well as performance at stock, I'm also testing overclocked performance as well. The golden sample in the name would suggest a higher quality chip was used compared to other GTX 460s, and should therefore allow for higher overclocks than would normally be expected. That seemed to be the case with this one at least, as at stock voltages, it managed a max stable clock of 875 MHz on the core, equating to a 1750 MHz shader clock. But with an increase in voltage to 1.087 volts, the 460 Golden Sample Edition recorded a max stable overclock of 886 MHz on the core, equating to a 1772 MHz shader clock, a 26.57% increase in core and shader clock over stock, or 31.26% over the reference GTX 460. The GDDR5 memory peaked at 1050 MHz, or 4200 MHz effectively, 16.67% over stock clocks, which seems about right for the GTX 460 and isn't really anything special. We're kicking things off with the graphics tests in 3DMark's Firestrike benchmark. The benchmark was run 3 times, with the scores from each run being averaged together to get to the final result. I've no comparison graphics cards to show for now, but at stock clocks, the GTX 460 Golden Sample Edition managed an average score of 2,519.33 points. With the overclock mentioned before, the 460 was now managing a score of 3,161.67 points, or 25.5% more performance than stock clocks was able to offer. First up for the games is an oldie but a still fairly popular game, CSGO, or Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Released back in 2012, it has received countless updates since then, which luckily, read unluckily, for people like me, have often come right in the middle of a benchmark session, forcing you to retest everything. I actually just reverted to testing it offline so I don't have to deal with that. Anywho, I'm running this at 1080p with max settings other than anti-aliasing and motion blur, which are disabled. Performance was actually reasonably okay. There was brief but noticeable stuttering seen when up close to other character models, such as your teammates or the enemies. Frame times could also be noticeably inconsistent at times as well, represented by micro stuttering. Overall, performance was quite acceptable, but it does look like the 1GB of VRAM on the 460 is maxing out, so ideally you'd need to reduce graphics settings a little to get things perfect. 124.2, 43.4 and 35.2 FPS was what the GTX 460 GS managed for average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively, with the overclock boosting this up to 149.7, 52.6 and 39.1 FPS for average 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. The performance had noticeably improved with the overclock, to the point that there were no noticeable issues at all throughout the test. There are, however, according to CapFrameX, which I used to get the benchmark figures, some spikes in frame times which are verging on the point of becoming noticeable as microstutter, so some people may have an issue with this, but in my opinion, the FPS was too high for me to notice these hitches at all. Next, we're on to GTA 5, released back in 2015 on PC, 5 years after the 460 was. So let's see how the golden sample handles this at 1080p with all settings on normal and 16x anisotropic filtering, shall we? Throughout the game, there were a couple noticeable but minor moments of micro-stuttering, as well as some brief hitches throughout as well. Overall, the game ran to a more than playable level, but you are going to notice some moments where the frame times can be noticeably inconsistent throughout the game, which is represented as micro-stutter. The results for stock clocks come with a slight caveat though. That caveat being that, for some reason, one of the benchmark runs performed noticeably better than the other two, so I decided to drop that particular run from the results, so as not to affect them by including an anomalous benchmark result. That aside, stock managed average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates of 68.6, 41.2 and 32.5 FPS respectively. The overclock improved things significantly, and thankfully there were no anomalies affecting the results this time round. 84.5, 55 and 42.7 FPS were what the 460 managed for average, 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. There were no noticeable issues throughout the test other than some slight micro-stutter at points, including in the desert area, where there were also some brief hitches and micro-stuttering at times too. Next up is 2016's Doom. 1080p, even at the lowest settings, is off the table for recommendation today, as the 460's performance is another one of those so bad it might actually melt your eyeballs sort of performances. And that is no overstatement, as my eyes genuinely were hurting from the strain caused by how jarring it was to watch. Later on in the chart, I've provided benchmark figures for 1080p for comparison's sake. That aside, 720p is what I'm testing in the video today, also at the lowest settings, and with 16x anisotropic filtering enabled as well. Oh, and it's also in OpenGL mode only, as Nvidia's Fermi-based graphics cards, such as this one, have no support for the better performing Vulkan API. And despite the low resolution, the game could still be noticeably micro-stuttery at points throughout. Nowhere near as bad as it was at 1080p, but you can still see that it's there. Stock clocks managed average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates of 57, 23.8 and 20.6 FPS respectively. The overclock boosted this up to 67.9, 25.9 and 22 FPS for average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively. Not a particularly huge improvement in 1% and 0.1% lows, and that shows in gameplay, as the stuttering isn't really much better than it was at stock clocks. Overall, the game is playable though, but for completely smooth performance, you'll probably want to reduce the resolution even further down than 720p. Rise of the Tomb Raider is last up, and this was a bit of a weird one. Throughout the test, there was what appeared to be some quite noticeable micro-stutter, but looking at the CapFrameX log, the frame times weren't inconsistent enough for that to be why the stuttering appeared so noticeable. I thought that it may have to do with VSync being off, but it's not something I remember experiencing during testing this game before at all. The game just seemed to not be as smooth as the FPS would lead you to believe. That aside, due to 1080p's performance being noticeably poor at times, even with the settings as low as possible, I decided to test this game at 900p, or 1600 by 900 as well, also with 16x anisotropic filtering enabled too. For the most part, the game actually ran quite well, but had the aforementioned stuttery but not caused by stutter appearance. It maintained at least 30 FPS throughout, and looking at the logs, there were points at which the frame times had become inconsistent, with some of the spikes being noticeable, and others right on the verge of becoming apparent. Overall, performance is plenty acceptable though. Stock clocks managed 41.7, 27.9 and 25 FPS, for average 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. 1080p stock and overclocked figures are also provided here for comparison's sake. The overclock improved things a fair bit at 900p, with figures of 52, 35 and 31 FPS being recorded for average 1% and 0.1% low frame rate respectively. Gameplay at 900p was noticeably smoother, but not without some minor remaining issues. The frame times at points do spike noticeably, leading to some noticeable hitches and stutters, but for the most part, performance was actually really good, and a definite improvement on stock clocks. The overclocked performance does come with a slight caveat though, in that the game did in fact occasionally crash due to instability. It wasn't unstable enough to prevent the benchmarks from being run fully, but it is something that you want to take into account if you're going for rock solid stability. So, to conclude, is the GTX 460 worth it today? Well, in a way, I'd say yeah, go for it. I only paid £12 including delivery, and it can run some reasonably modern games to a playable standard. Some you'll have to reduce the resolution for, mind you. Older games will run no issue, but you would probably want to go for the 2GB version if you can get a hold of it though, as the 1GB of GDDR5 on the one I benchmarked in this video was a limiting factor in some of the games. If you're just wanting to run some games though to a more playable standard and aren't a graphics snob, then the 460 is still plenty, even 10 years on from its initial release. To finish off the video for today, I'd like to give shoutouts to Patreon supporters Shadow in the Void and Peter for helping to make all of this possible. So, if you liked the video, please remember to click like and leave a comment as well. And you could also subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more content like this too. And if you even want to support me in creating these videos, you can do so through my Patreon at patreon.com/benchytests or through Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/benchytests. And remember, Ko-fi has a hyphen between the KO and the FI. But if you do decide to become a patron, you'll also gain early access to all of my videos 3 days before the public do, for as long as you remain a patron. So thanks again for watching everyone. Hopefully I'll see you next time.